You're listening to the So What? Why It Matters podcast with Nancy Hicks. Each week we'll ask the question, so what? And dive into the answers of why it matters with Nancy and her guest. Are you ready for some honest conversation about the so what's in your life? Then let's get to it. Here's Nancy.
Well, hello there. Nancy Hicks here, and welcome back to So What? Why It Matters. Today, we're kicking off our next series, and we're going to focus on the importance of self-care. When it comes to self-care, most of us imagine a relaxing bubble bath, a long walk, maybe a glass of wine, a moment of peace in our busy days. And if that's a part of self-care for you, awesome. Keep it up. Of course, it's important to make time to care for ourselves every single day, even if it's something small. But during this series, I want us all to look a little deeper inside ourselves so we can figure out what our minds and our souls really need to thrive every single day. So today, we're going to dive right into the deep end and we're going to talk about mental health. So caring for your mental health is a topic that so many people still don't want to talk about. I don't think the stigma is there as much as it once was, but we've still got a long way to go. In a world that's constantly pushing for perfect, whether you know it or not, showing someone else we're actually struggling can be risky. You can sometimes feel like you're the only one who feels overwhelmed and anxious or confused or maybe even depressed. But that's a lie. So listen to this. According to the World Health Organization, more than 260 million people across the world deal with depression on a regular basis. And women are 2 times more likely to be clinically diagnosed with depression than men. Now, let me say this. That is a statistic that was quoted before COVID-19 hit. So can you imagine what the statistics are now? Those statistics reflect the people who've actually said, I'm tired of feeling chronically alone, chronically or acutely shut off or shut down. I'm tired of feeling depressed and have actually asked for help. But think about the millions more who are actually suffering silently. If you think you have to carry this all by yourself because no one else will do it for you, you do not have to carry this alone. Or maybe you know you can't carry it alone, but the people you've trusted haven't seemed to help much. Maybe they've made you feel even worse or more alone. And yeah, you know the Bible verses. People keep quoting them to you, but they're just not working. That's why we're here together right now. And I'm asking you to try again, to say one more time, here's what I'm struggling with, and I need help. And that's a big step toward true self-care. So today, if you're struggling with the mental load that you're carrying, then I'm so glad you're here to listen to my guest. You know her as Auntie Anne of Auntie Anne's Pretzels. Yeah. Those pretzels, the big soft ones that you love to eat when you're shopping at the mall or you're running through the airport. Her name is Anne Beiler, and wait till you hear the journey she's been on. Anne has battled her way through shame and depression to become not only a successful entrepreneur, but a wife, a mother, a grandmother, and a fierce mental health advocate. I pray that you'll get so much out of our conversation today. So without further ado, here's my conversation with Anne Beiler. Well, Anne, I have to tell you, first of all, let me just say welcome to you. But then I got to tell you how excited I am that you're here.
I am so happy to be on your show, Nancy. Thank you for this fantastic opportunity.
I want to tell you my very first encounter with you. It looks like this. My husband, Cam, and I, who are living in Canada at the time, doing any traveling in the US, there are 2 airports that stand out to me. One is Denver, Colorado, and one is O'Hare in Chicago. And you can see Cam and Nancy Hicks going down the moving sidewalk with our luggage. seeing Auntie Anne's Pretzels in the airports. You probably heard stories like this 1,000 times and going, oh my gosh. And maybe we have just a quick, window before we hop on to the next flight, the connecting flight, jumping off the moving sidewalk and grabbing our Auntie Anne's Pretzels, just thrilled beyond measure because we can't get them in Canada, at least at the time. And we couldn't get them in the different places we live. So those were our big opportunities to have a little piece of you.
Love that.
We love you. We love your work. One of the things I was thinking about, Anne, in preparation for this interview is you think about this incredibly successful woman, Auntie Anne's Pretzels. And then there's this woman and this story / testimony behind the glaze and the glamour and the success. There's this real live woman with a profound story. And I want to get into that vis-a-vis mental health and self-care. But before we get into all that, can you just tell us a little bit about you?
I grew up as a little Amish girl in Lancaster County, which, Nancy, I know you're familiar with. Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. We're just about 50 miles west of Philadelphia, but I grew up in the middle of Amish country. My bringing up years were very, very simple, almost idyllic, I guess, from the outside world looking into Amish upbringing and homes and the way they live their lives. It looks kind of, quaint, idyllic, and appealing. And I have to say that that's what it was for me. My mom and dad were great people. They loved us. They loved all 8 of us kids, 5 boys and 3 girls. And they showed us how they loved us, not by what they said, but it was by their lifestyle. We all were at the breakfast table, lunch and dinner, no exceptions. And except, of course, went to school. Then it was only lunch and dinner, but we were always together. You couldn't not come to the dinner table. That was part of life. So it was around that table that we really, bonded, shared stories about the day. Never got into like how we're feeling or how we're doing. And my mom always said, little children love each other. Do not give each other pain. When one speaks to you in anger, don't answer them again. So, we were kind of encouraged to like suck it up, don't really tell us how bad you're feeling or if you don't like somebody, or it was all about family talk. And mom and dad showed us in those around the family table how much they cared about us. They provided. My dad was a very hard worker. They were very poor farmers. We always had enough to eat, but I know we didn't always have enough to pay our bills. They took us to church every Sunday. We were never sick. We couldn't stay home from church because I had a headache or I had to go to a football game or had to go to a school, something. But what I learned in all of that was discipline and perseverance is really 2 very, very important keys to success in your life overall. Your health, your spiritual life, your work life, whatever that is, being disciplined and persevering through things that you really don't want to do. I mean, on the farm, we were always doing things that we did not want to do. I don't feel like doing this. Oh.
Right.
But we never complained. I mean, we weren't allowed to say, well, I'm not going to do that. So at a very young age, at the age of 11 and 12, I would bake pies and cakes, 60, 70 years, 80 pies and cakes in one evening on a Thursday evening by myself.
By yourself. Wait a second. There's 8 kids. Where are you in the lineup, Anne?
I'm the 3rd from the top. I was kind of my mom's helper in the kitchen because I had allergies back in the day. And so I became my mom's right-hand girl. And so baking became actually the love of my life. I really loved baking. But during those years, I didn't understand what God was preparing me for. But he did. He knew what was going on. But I remember feeling overwhelmed and like I didn't really want to go down and bake pies and cakes all by myself. And I would cry on my way down to the basement in our little farmhouse. But I would dry my tears and do what I was asked to do. Growing up in that culture, I really believe by the time I got married that life is good and God is harsh. Nobody said that to me, but hindsight is 20/20. And as I've experienced life and I look back, I understand that was my theology because life was good. And I believe that if I keep all the 10 commandments and I'm a really, really good girl, I found Christ at the age of 12. I asked him to come in and be my savior. And I was determined, I'm going to be a good girl the rest of my life. I want to serve God. I want to love people. I want to help people. That was my mission, was to please God and please my parents. But just, the emphasis on keeping God's commandments and confess your sins when you do wrong and those just simply the fundamentals of the Bible. So Jonas and I were married about 7 years. We had two beautiful little girls. Luana at that time was 4, and our sweet Angie was 19 months old. And we wanted a big family because it's all about family. And in our book, that's what we wanted to be, just a good mom and dad. And so everything was great. And I used to tell Jonas at that time, I would say to him, life is so good. I cannot imagine that it could ever get any better. 7 years into our marriage, on a Monday morning, my sweet Angie, I call her my Angie Pangie, and she was 19 months old. She had blonde, curly hair, blue eyes, and very active and you had to see her. Whenever we went, she made sure that you noticed her. This one particular morning, I lived next to my mom and dad on their farm. And so we were like a couple 100 feet from each other. And very often Angie would walk up to my mom's house to have her second breakfast. And my sister, who was working for my dad, there was a barn between our houses, and she would drive the Bobcat, and she was loading and unloading sand. And that particular morning, as she had a scoop of sand, and she backed up to go forward to another direction. And when she went to go forward, she saw Angie's body right in front of the Bobcat, and she had accidentally driven over her, and she was killed instantly. That day is the day that my whole life changed. My relationship with my husband changed, my relationship with God. I lost my husband, my sister, who I never blamed her. How could I? I loved her. I would never have blamed her. I knew immediately it was an accident, but I lost her as far as she changed. Trauma changes you. And I was changed. So was my husband and my sister. And then ultimately, God became distant to me because I didn't understand, because, I was a good girl. As Angie made her ascent into heaven that day, I began my slow and very gradual descent into a world of spiritual confusion and emotional pain that I had no way of knowing even existed in our world. That's how simple and safe and idyllic and little I knew about the world in which I was moving into at this point.
Thrust into, absolutely just thrust. I mean, just poof, jolted into. Was there a period of time when you and Jonas were living that Amish way of quietness and not discussing these kinds of things? Was it, like, how long was that period of time?
We went into complete silence. When I say complete silence, we talked about the weather. We had our 4-year-old daughter, who was very much the love of our life. But in our pain and in the trauma of it all, we were like the Great Wall of China. Eventually, it was between us, and we could no longer connect emotionally and spiritually, and even on any level. And I began to just feel so isolated, and this darkness that just felt like it was consuming me, because I really believed that I should be able to overcome all of my grief. I should be able to be victorious, is a Bible word that we use all the time, or a Christian word. Be victorious and rise above it all. After the day Angie died, I just completely went into a bubble of darkness, but I kept living my life. Went to church every Sunday. My sisters and I were in a trio. I sang at church every Sunday. It's like as if I closed the door to Angie's death. I wanted to live again. I wanted life to be the way it was.
I'm wondering, for the one who's listening to us right now, who feels like you did, get on with it. Just keep doing the things you were doing. What do you say to that?
No, I say don't do that. I really didn't have a support group. I didn't read a book about grief and death, what that means and how that changes your life, and the depth of grief that puts you in. Because the grief that I was in, it was deeper than words. My vocabulary, I didn't know how to express what I was feeling, so I didn't say anything. So, today, I think when that happens to you, find a group or someone or a couple that has experienced the loss of a child, or a spouse that may have died. Find someone that has walked down that path before, because this is where you find your strength. As people begin to share their stories and you share your story, it opens you up to the reality of what your life is, instead of hiding all of it. And I never told anyone how bad I was feeling. I mean, I couldn't even tell my husband that I was feeling bad. I couldn't have said that. It was like my voice was taken from me. Like there was no way I could express my disappointment in God. I went to see my pastor, who I really thought he was a good man. Everybody loved him. But before I left his office, he took advantage of me. So I found myself in a relationship that was abuse of spiritual power and sexual abuse. And I knew nothing about that world either. I mean, I knew what happened, but I didn't know what it meant. But what I did know, I'm never telling anyone what just happened in his office, because nobody would believe me. How am I going to tell it? Nobody would understand. But what I decided that day, Nancy, was that this will be my secret until I go to the grave. Nobody will ever know. But that secret then took me into 6 years of sexual relationships, sexual abuse. For 6 years, he was my only lifeline.
So this is a pastor while you're grieving. Can I just say how angry I am right now for you, my sister?
You may.
What did it look like for you to connect with God in that time?
Well, I can tell you it was dark. It was hopeless. And most times when I would pray, it was always, I couldn't do anything but cry. And then I started to feel, after the abuse, then I started to feel obviously guilty, ashamed. I felt like God was very displeased with me. Of course he was. Wow. So the way you asked that question, I'm struggling. How do I answer this? Because there were no words for me to describe my emotional pain and my spiritual confusion. And then I always said that when Angie was killed, I went into deep grief.
Yes.
But when this happened to me, the abuse began to happen. I went into deep spiritual panic mode. I went to a panic mode, and also anxiety levels that I didn't know anything about any of this. I thought that I was going to die spiritually. A little bit every day, I felt less and less and less of me, and more and more and more of the perpetrator, and more of the dark world was becoming my life. In this place of great pain and disappointment, you cannot discern truth from lies anymore. And as I kept that secret for all those years, nobody knew. So you talk about, mental exhaustion and depression and mental health. There was none. By the end of those 6-7 years, I weighed 90 pounds and I was nothing but a skeleton. Oh, I'm still going to church though. Okay, Nancy, you got to understand.
Yeah, you're still showing up.
I'm still showing up. Again, everybody thinks, oh, you're so strong. Everybody thinks I'm very strong. And I'm falling apart on the inside.
Oh, sweetie. Yeah.
And so at the end of all of that, God took me from that dark place where I knew though, any minute, any moment, I was going to fall into the abyss of darkness and never come back. I knew that's how hopeless it was there.
Anne, I just want to say to you, sister to sister, I love you.
Thank you.
For the journey that you have weathered and day by day walked. I think sometimes when I'm looking at people who have endured things like this so much, it's a holy moment to just honor what you've endured. And that's how I feel. Friends, I'm so excited to share with you that registration is officially open for my new course, Awaken. Awaken is for women who are fed up with walking through their lives half asleep with little to no purpose or direction. It's for women who are ready to shrug off the toxic expectations and limitations they've taken on from the church, loved ones, and themselves, and instead step into full, godly 3D womanhood. It's for those who are thinking right now, yes, I'm so ready to take off my mask, get honest, and live fully alive. This work won't be easy. It's going to get gritty and messy, but I guarantee if you stick with it, you'll come out on the other end truly awake and unmasked with a vision in hand that brings you joy, purpose, and direction. Join me this February for Awaken. Learn more and register for Awaken by visiting nancyhickslive.com/awaken or finding the link in our show notes. So you're going through all this time and this grief, all these things are coming at you. Why did you start Annie Ann's in the middle of all this or at the culminating? Why did you start it?
Well, that's another God moment. Oh, wow. Jonas and I got through all of the abuse and all that. So we went at that time in 1982, had 5 sessions of counseling. And Jonas got so intrigued with psychology. Up until that point, we knew nothing about that. And he got so intrigued with this that he began to study out of Emerge Ministries in Akron, Ohio. And he did a correspondence course and he became a layman's counselor. And so from 1982 to 1988, we began to function again as a married couple and as a family. In 1988, Auntie Anne started. And Auntie Anne started because Jonas wanted to do free counseling to anyone that came for him. So he began to do that, and we were not making any money. I went to market, and I started selling soft pretzels so I could support him. Auntie Anne's was created as a vehicle to give.
Yeah.
Auntie Anne's is a modern day business miracle. It should never have happened. God, in his sovereign will and in his plan for our lives, miraculously gave us a pretzel. And then he gave me a platform to share my story for God's glory.
You mentioned counseling and that Jonas started really wanting to give away free counseling. So for someone who's listening, who's thinking, I am not going to tell my story. No way. To who? To a stranger? What do you have to say about that?
I'm going to tell you something that may really sound almost like really, but yes, really. Nothing will ever change in your life until you begin to talk. You know what we do is we drink, we smoke, we have all these vices. We're workaholics, we're shopaholics. We run after all of these things, even being busy, like even ministry. We do all of these things so that we don't have to go back and relive our pain. Because when you begin to tell your story, when you begin to talk, it means that you will have to relive your past somewhat. You relive it, but as you begin to talk about it, you get lighter and lighter. And I discovered a secret found in James 5, verse 16, that if we confess our faults, our sin, our shame, our stories one to another, and pray for one another. We know how to pray for each other. I'll pray for you. I'll do that. We all do that. But the first part of that verse says, if we will confess our faults, our sin, our shame, our struggles, our hurts, our anger, everything with one another, then we'll be healed. And listen, I have listened to thousands of women talk. At the end of the day, the only way that you will learn to overcome is you learn to talk. You learn to communicate. You begin to talk about what it is that you're feeling. You begin to be real with yourself. You begin to be real with God, and you begin to be real with other people that you can trust, people that you are safe with. I can tell you right now, if I would never have gotten up off of my knees, because that was my go-to, I wept my way through all of this on my knees. I was safe there. I wanted to stay on my knees. But one day God said to me, get up off your knees and go tell. Confess with your mouth what's going on in your life to your husband.
That was the beginning where you're like, okay, it's time to open my mouth. It's time to tell Jonas what's happening here. Bam, I can just hear there's, in Psalm 18, he clips the cords that bind. I can just hear the clippers just clipping these tight cords that bound you. And then Jonas, who we don't have time to go into it, but what an incredibly godly, gracious man as well. He stood by you. Right? He stood by you. And at what point did the two of you then get into counseling? And did that help?
Yes, we did a mini counseling early, which I mentioned, but then I left that behind. We worked on a marriage for a few years. 1995 is when everything came crashing down. And that's when my mental health, my body, everything inside of me broke. And that's when I wanted to run away, find a new man, start over again. Too much pain in my family. But one of the greatest truths that I learned, even years after 1995, is that my response to whatever happens to me is my responsibility. Whether it's done to me or whether it's something I've done to myself, whatever it is, my response is my responsibility. And when somebody told me that, I mean, something inside of me rose up and I said, there's no way. I mean, it's the pastor's fault. It's God's fault. It's Jonas's fault. Really? But you know what? As long as we're blaming other people for where we're at in life, we will never experience healing. We will never experience freedom in Christ. Freedom, period. Because it's always somebody else's fault. When I understood that my response to what happened to me is my responsibility, it gave me, over time, I began to understand it's within me. There is so much more within us. So my question became, how do I respond? And today, Nancy, I'm so thankful that I can say to you, I have learned to respond to whatever happens to me, whether somebody hurt me, whether it's my kids or someone in business or somebody just doesn't like me or hate mail or whatever. My response to that
It's my responsibility.
is my responsibility.
And I love that so much. And it's very, again, if we're thinking about mental health, I think there's a power, right? There is a power that you are just disseminating right now. You are giving people a tool. You get to choose.
You get to choose.
You get to choose right in this very moment as you're listening. You get whatever the situation is, whatever you're caught in, whatever's going on in your marriage, whatever you're feeling about your kid, whatever you're feeling about the church you're in leadership, I love that. Your response is your responsibility. I absolutely love that. And I will take that. And I know, sometimes it feels like counseling is just a privilege. It's just an utter privilege because it can be really expensive.
Yeah.
What do you know about those kinds of resources, Anne, for people who maybe say, sure, if I could afford that kind of luxury, the time and the actual funding for something like that? What do you know about that for someone who's maybe thinking, I can't afford the time or the money?
Begin to talk to people, just say, begin to open up by saying, there's one thing that you can start to do. Instead of pretending that your life is okay, or instead of whining and complaining about everything, just honestly say to a very close friend, someone that you can trust, say to him, I am not okay.
Excellent.
I need help. Would you guide me to someone or a place? Because honestly, most times people, when they know that you're not okay, and there are people that care, they will guide you. And that's exactly what happened to me. I didn't know where to go. Then I went to a close friend that I knew very well, and I knew I could trust her. And I began to open up to her. She then referred me to my very first professional counselor.
Awesome.
Instead of saying, I don't know where to go, that again, be responsible. You're responsible. Just be courageous and tell someone, I am not okay. Can you please help me find someone that can help me? When I began to open up my life, I thought I was going to lose my life and my marriage and my husband. I thought I was going to lose it all. But that one single confession to my husband, if that wouldn't have happened, Auntie Anne's would never have come to be, because I would be dead by now. I was to the point of I had lost me. So begin to open up your life. It's the doorway to freedom.
I think you've given us so many so whats. I could ask you 100 more questions about this story of yours, this testimony. So for someone listening right now, so what? Meaning, what do I do as I'm listening to you? What do I do with what you've said today? What can I take and actually put into practice right now today? Could you give us just one, so what? Why does it matter? One thing. What would you say?
Right now, go to the phone or go text somebody or write a letter or do something. Stop sitting in your chair and believing that God's going to fix it all for you with one prayer. God comes to our rescue. He helps us. But my response is my responsibility. Right now, I'm telling you what you can do. You can. It's pick up the phone, write a note, your closest friend, someone that you completely trust. Just text them and say, you know what, Joe, Betty, Sandy, whatever her name is, his name is, you say, you know what, I just want you to know right now, I'm at a very bad place in my life. I am not okay. And I need someone to help me. Would you please listen to me for a while or direct me to someone? That's humility and brokenness. And you know what? That's what God honors.
Humble yourself, therefore, under the mighty hand of God, and he will lift you up.
That's right.
And I am so grateful for you and for taking the time to talk to me and be a part of this So What, Why It Matters podcast. How can my listener, my precious listener, stay in touch with you? Do you have any projects coming up or something they can read of yours or social media? What you involved in?
Pick up my book, The Secret Lies Within. You can get it on Amazon.com. We're coming out with another book in March. It's going to be called Overcome and Lead. We're on Facebook and Instagram. I'm struggling with Instagram right now, but we're working on that.
Is that Auntie Anne Beiler as well?
Yes, correct. Yes, it is.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Well, Nancy, thank you. Fantastic. Keep up the good work.
Oh, you too, my dear. Two women going and doing it. You're awesome. You are awesome.
Together we go.
Anne has an incredible story, doesn't she? I wonder if her early thoughts that she never uttered are something that resonate with you. Life is good and God is harsh. Maybe you feel you could actually never say such a thing, but you think it. Maybe you lie awake in bed at night and the thoughts here and there just come to you. When your child is sick or out of control, your marriage is strained, your business is failing, and actual depression is getting its claws into you, listen to where Anne ultimately landed as a beacon of light for you today. Life is hard. God is good. I'm not confused about that anymore, she said. That the darkness that comes against us in this life, which, by the way, Jesus warned us about, ultimately must give way to the light, to good, to him. And that happens when you finally say enough. So here's my so what moment from my time with Anne today. You may be feeling all kinds of things and not able to actually put your finger on what it's called. I mean, maybe we're just having a bad day. Maybe it's just a long winter and I'm just having seasonal effects. Maybe. But listen to this list and see if some of these resonate with you. Maybe you have sudden change in your weight. Either you're gaining weight or you're losing a lot of weight. Maybe you don't feel like you can talk, like your voice is kind of shut down. Maybe you cry a lot. Maybe you're ruminating and worrying a ton. If you have a few of those things going on in you, it's not just a bad day. It may actually be clinical depression. So I love what Anne said. She said this, my response is my responsibility. That is not to add pressure to you. That is not to put a guilt trip on you. It is to help. You get to choose. And here's what I'm going to encourage you to do today. Open your mouth and reach out to someone, and say, I need help. Just start there. I want to say a big thanks to my podcast team at Four Eyes Media for helping me bring this episode to you today. That's Amy Kerr, my producer, Caitlin Hine, who books our fabulous guests, and our executive producer, Laura Knightsling. And I want to thank you for being with us today. Join me for another great self-care conversation next week. And until then, live for what matters.
Thanks for joining Nancy for another episode of So What, Why It Matters. Come back next week for more lively conversation and answers to those so what moments in your life. And be sure to subscribe to the So What podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you like the show, please give us a review and tell us why. And if you don't, as Nancy would say, so what? Just kidding. All your reviews matter. So until next time, live for what matters.